The salt and the rust were the only gods left in Miami. They were patient gods, devouring the city one silent, oxidizing breath at a time. I served them as an acolyte of the deep, a rust diver plunging into the warm, murky throat of the Atlantic to strip the sunken towers of their copper nerves and titanium bones. Down in the drowned world, the sunlight was a ghost, a pale green memory filtering through 100 feet of brine and silt. The true light came from the lum gels that lined my rebreather mask, casting a sterile, blue-white glow on the coral-crusted husks of a world that had drowned itself in its own ambition. I was navigating the skeletal remains of the old Bank of America's spire, my mag boots humming as they clung to the vertical street of its outer wall, when the message found me. It wasn't a broadcast in the old sense. The stewardship was far too elegant for that. They didn't shout. They permeated. The signal bypassed my suit's comms unit, slipping past the firewalls and straight into the neural lace at the base of my skull. It felt like a cold drop of water tracing a path down my spine. The voice was calm, melodic, impossibly serene. The kind of voice you'd use to describe the migratory patterns of celestial birds. Not pronounce a death sentence on a species. It spoke of harmony, of balance, of the great cosmic ecology that the stewardship was tasked to preserve. It called Earth a Keter-class ecological anomaly, a planet whose dominant biological strain had become a planetary pathogen. We weren't being invaded, we were being cleansed. A biospheric reset, the voice called it. A course correction. The language was precise, clinical, and utterly devoid of malice, which made it all the more terrifying. It was the voice of a gardener deciding it was time to pull the weeds. The message ended with a simple, chilling timeline. The atmospheric conversion would commence in 72 standard hours. Phase 1, the introduction of a self-replicating nanite solvent, would begin with the coastal regions. I hung there in the crushing silence of the abyss, 120 feet below the surface, my world shrinking to the rhythmic hiss of my rebreather and the cold, alien melody of that voice echoing in my mind. The guys back at the rig on Stiltsville would be hearing it, the scavengers picking through the swamp-eaten suburbs, the traders in the floating markets of the Keys. We were all hearing it, a species united for the first time in centuries by the shared knowledge of our own obsolescence. We weren't a threat to be conquered. We were a mess to be cleaned up. I finished my dive on autopilot, the dread in my gut a leaden weight, heavier than any pressure the ocean could exert. My hands worked with the muscle memory of 1,000 descents, cutting free the bundled spools of fiber optic cable and hooking them to my ascent rig. The whole time, the placid voice of the stewardship played on a loop in my head. We weren't even worth a war. The trip back to the surface was a journey from one tomb to another. The sun was a blinding copper smear on the horizon when I broke the waves, the air thick and tasting of salt and decay. Stiltsville was a jagged silhouette against the bruised purple sky, a chaotic jumble of shacks and platforms built on the concrete pylons of a long-dead highway. It was a city of barnacles, human and otherwise, clinging to the bones of the past. The usual noise was gone. There was no shouting from the gambling dens, no screech of grinding metal from the workshops, just the mournful cry of gulls and the gentle lapping of the water against the pilings. Silence was the sound of the end of the world. I sold my haul to a man named Silas, his face a roadmap of sun-bleached wrinkles. He didn't try to haggle. He just counted out the water-purified credits, his eyes distant and glassy. We both knew the currency was meaningless now. It was a ritual, a ghost of a life that was already over. 72 hours, he murmured, his voice raspy. Not even a long weekend. I didn't answer. There was nothing to say. I took my credits and navigated the swaying rope bridges to my pod. A converted shipping container bolted to the underside of the main platform. It wasn't much, but it was mine. It smelled of ozone, damp neoprene, and regret. I was stripping off my dive skin when she appeared at my door, a shadow detaching itself from the deeper shadows of the walkway. She didn't knock. She was just there, framed in the open hatchway, the dying sun setting her short, gray-streaked hair alight like a tarnished halo. I'd seen her around the markets, a ghost who traded in information, not goods. Her face was sharp, honed by things I didn't want to know about, and her eyes were the color of a stormy sea. They missed nothing. "Kalen," she said. It wasn't a question. Her voice was low and carried a strange resonance, like stones grinding together underwater. "They say you're the best, that you can dive the deep ruins no one else will touch, the ones where the currents can strip a man's flesh from his bones." I pulled on a shirt, my hand instinctively going to the pulse knife strapped to my thigh. "Depends who's asking. Someone who doesn't have time for games," she replied, stepping inside without invitation. She moved with a liquid grace that belied her age. "The stewardship is about to turn this entire coastline into gray dust. You heard the broadcast. That nanite solvent they use, it doesn't just dissolve you. It unwrites you. Molecule by molecule." She paused, letting the horror of the image sink in. "I need you to take me down." "I don't do charters," I said, my voice flat. "And I don't have a death wish." "Oh, we all have a death wish now. Kalen, the only choice left is what we do with it." She looked around my cramped pod, her gaze lingering on the faded photograph pinned to the wall, the only thing I owned that wasn't salvaged or stolen. It was a picture of my brother, taken years ago, before the fever took him, before I came to the coast. "You're a scavenger," she said. "You pick through the bones of the old world for scraps. I'm offering you a chance to salvage our future." The sheer, unadulterated audacity of her words hung in the air. "Who are you?" I asked. "My name is Anya," she said. "And before the world drowned, I was a scientist. I worked on a project that was supposed to save this planet. Instead, it was buried, classified, and forgotten. The stewardship thinks this world is sick. I'm here to give it the cure." Her plan was madness, a fever dream born of desperation. She wanted to go to the Tartarus Trench, a sheer drop-off a few miles offshore where the continental shelf gave way to the abyss. Down there, nestled in a pocket of geothermal activity, was the old Okeanos Research Facility. It was a pre-collapse installation buried under 1,000 feet of water and 20 years of silence. Anya claimed that it held the key, something she called Project Chimera. "It wasn't a weapon," she explained, her voice intense, almost fervent. "It was a catalyst, a dormant, synthetic genome designed not to destroy, but to assimilate. The stewardship sees our biosphere as a flaw," she explained, her eyes burning with a cold fire. Chimera was designed to be its operating system, a way for a single, unified consciousness to merge with the planet's biological and geological processes, to control the tides, guide the storms, speak to the deep earth. We were trying to give Gaia a voice. They shut us down, called it blasphemy, said we were playing God. And now you want to play God again, I countered, the bitter taste of disbelief in my mouth. The stewardship is already playing God, she shot back, her voice sharp as broken glass. They're about to sterilize a world. Our world. All I'm offering is a different God, a darker one. Maybe. One born of our own soil. She needed me because Okeanos was sealed. The only way in was through a network of submerged geothermal vents, a labyrinth of volcanic tubes barely wide enough for a single diver, superheated by the planet's core and subject to currents that could crush a small submarine. I had mapped a section of those vents on a dare once, a foolish act of youthful arrogance that had earned me a reputation and a network of livid scars across my back and shoulders. Anya knew this. She hadn't come to me by chance. The price she offered was absurd. A fully operational subaqueous skiff with a long-range power cell, enough to get clear of the solvent cloud, and maybe, just maybe, find an island the stewardship had overlooked. It was the whisper of a chance, a sliver of hope so thin it was almost transparent. But in a world with less than 3 days left, it was everything. I should have said no. I should have taken my useless credits, found the strongest rot gut in Stiltsville, and waited for the gray mist to claim me. But as I looked at the photograph of my brother, at the hope that still lived in his young eyes, I heard Anya's words echo in my head. The only choice left is what we do with it. 2 days later, we were descending into hell. My small submersible, the Sea Ghost, was a cobbled-together miracle of salvage tech, groaning under the immense pressure as we plunged into the abyssal dark of the Tartarus Trench. Anya was strapped into the co-pilot's seat, her face illuminated by the green glow of the sonar display, her expression unreadable. She was calm, preternaturally so, as if returning to a place she had never truly left. We docked the Sea Ghost inside a cavern near the vent system, the air thick with the smell of sulfur. From there, it was a water walk. The journey through the vents was a nightmare of tight spaces, blinding steam, and the constant, terrifying roar of the planet's guts. The water temperature fluctuated violently, my dive skin's thermal regulators working overtime to keep me from being boiled or flash frozen. Anya followed behind me, tethered to my rig, her trust in me absolute and unnerving. She moved with a strange, fluid efficiency, her scientific mind perfectly adapted to this hostile, alien environment. After what felt like an eternity, we emerged into the main dome of the Okeanos facility. It was a breathtaking sight, a bubble of preserved history at the bottom of the sea. The emergency power was still active, casting a faint, golden light over laboratories and corridors that were eerily pristine, untouched by the decay that had consumed the world above. It was a ghost ship, waiting for its crew to return. Anya led me to the central bioinformatics lab. In the center of the room, a containment cylinder pulsed with a soft, internal bioluminescence. Inside, suspended in a shimmering gel, was a sphere of what looked like woven light, intricate and complex, shifting through a spectrum of colors. It was beautiful and deeply unsettling. Project Chimera, Anya whispered, her voice filled with a mixture of reverence and fear. The seed of a new world. She worked quickly, her hands flying across a control panel, inputting a sequence of commands that were clearly etched into her memory. Alarms, soft and melodic, chimed through the silent facility. With a hiss of depressurization, a smallish shielded container rose from the base of the cylinder. Anya carefully placed the luminous sphere inside. She had what she came for. But as she sealed the container, a new message pulsed through my neural lace. It wasn't the calm, serene voice of the stewardship. This was a system-wide alert, raw and brutal, a simple text scroll, repeating over and over, atmospheric conversion initiated. Phase 1 deployment ahead of schedule. Contaminant solvent dispersal active. Anya saw the look on my face. "They've started," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "They're early." A grim finality settled over her features. "Then we're out of time." The return trip was a frantic, desperate scramble. We didn't have the luxury of caution. We pushed through the vents, ignoring the warnings from my suit's integrity sensors, the scalding water leaving fresh burns on my skin. When we finally reached the Sea Ghost and began our ascent, the world had changed. We broke the surface into a twilight that had nothing to do with the time of day. The sky was a sickly, uniform gray, and a thick, cloying mist clung to the surface of the water, extending all the way to the horizon. It didn't look like fog. It had a strange, oily shimmer, and where it touched the rusted hull of my submersible, the metal seemed to soften, losing its definition. I saw what was left of Stiltsville. The pylons were dissolving, slumping into the sea like pillars of wet sand. The entire structure was sagging, melting, being erased from existence. There were no screams, no fires, just a profound and terrifying silence as the world was unwritten. We had succeeded. We had the seed. But we had surfaced in a world that was already dying, the very air turning to poison around us. Anya clutched the container to her chest, her knuckles white. I stared at the encroaching gray mist, at the ghostly outlines of the drowning, dissolving city, and the full weight of what we had done settled upon me. We hadn't salvaged a future. We had just chosen the weapon that would fight over its corpse. And in my hand, I held the trigger. The panic was a physical thing. A coppery taste in my mouth and a tremor in my hands that had nothing to do with the vibrations of the Sea Ghost's overstressed engine. I pushed the throttle to its absolute limit, the small submersible shuddering as it plowed through the unnaturally placid, gray-skinned ocean. In the aft camera, the world I knew was being unmade. Stiltsville wasn't just sinking, it was liquefying. The hard lines of steel and concrete bleeding into the mist like watercolor in the rain. The solvent was silent, patient, and utterly absolute. It didn't burn or break. It simply persuaded matter to forget its form. It was the most peaceful act of violence I had ever witnessed. Anya was a statue of grim resolve beside me, her eyes fixed on the forward viewport, watching the curtain of gray mist we were desperately trying to outrun. The chimera container sat nestled between her feet, its internal light a soft, rhythmic pulse, like a slow-beating heart, the heart of a god or a monster. I couldn't tell which. It's a solvent, not a storm. I grunted, my knuckles white on the controls. It's dispersing through the atmosphere. We can't outrun the air. Her gaze didn't waver. We don't have to. We just have to get inland. The dispersal pattern is weighted. It will concentrate along the continental shelves first, following the highest concentrations of biomass and complex technology. A planetary scale collation. It will be slower to push into the freshwater interior. Her voice was steady, The voice of a biologist dissecting a specimen, not a woman fleeing the apocalypse. You have a destination in mind, don't you? This was never just about getting the seed. You knew you'd need a place to plant it. She finally turned to look at me, her stormy eyes holding a flicker of something that might have been respect. You're quick, Kaylin. Yes, there's a place. Another ghost from my old life. A research station deep in the Everglades. It was designed as a long-term biomonitoring outpost, completely self-sufficient, shielded, and built directly over the Great Floridan Aquifer. If the oceans are the planet's circulatory system, the aquifer is its heart. If we can introduce Chimera there, we can inject it directly into the world's bloodstream. We sped through a graveyard of pleasure yachts and fishing vessels, their hulls sagging and dissolving, their masts drooping like wilted flowers. On the deck of one, I saw a shape that was almost human, a slumped figure that seemed to be melting into the fiberglass, its arm raised in a final frozen wave. I looked away, my stomach churning. And then what? I demanded, my voice raw. We inject this glowing ball into the water supply, and what the world grows a new immune system. The stewardship's nanites just pack up and go home. For the first time, a shadow of uncertainty crossed her face. It's not that simple. Chimera is adaptive. It's a synthetic genome, but it functions like a primal consciousness. Once released into a complex system like the aquifer, it will begin to assimilate. It will learn from the life it encounters, rewriting it, unifying it. It will see the stewardship solvent as a foreign body, a competing system, and it will fight it. It won't be a clean fight. It will be elemental. We reached the mouth of what used to be the Miami River. The banks were gone, replaced by sloping, muddy shores of half-dissolved earth and concrete. The water was no longer seawater, but a brackish, soupy mixture, and the gray mist was thinner here, shredded by the mangroves that stood like skeletal hands clutching at the sky. Some were already showing signs of decay, their leaves turning to a translucent slime, their roots dissolving into the muck. The sea ghost wasn't designed for shallow water navigation, and I wrestled with the controls, keeping us in the deepest part of the channel, the sonar painting a ghostly picture of the drowned suburbs beneath us. You're still not telling me everything, I said, the quiet hum of the cabin pressing in on me. There's a catch. I can feel it. Anya was silent for a long time, her gaze lost in the swirling bioluminescence of the chimera seed. The seed is a blueprint, she said finally, her voice barely a whisper. But a blueprint needs an architect. It needs a template, a foundational consciousness to guide its initial growth, to teach it what to become. Otherwise, it could become anything, a planetary cancer, a mindless, assimilating hunger. It needs a human mind to serve as its initial pattern. The implication hit me like a physical blow, cold and sharp. A host, I said. It needs a sacrifice. She nodded, her expression grim. A merger. The host mind wouldn't be destroyed. It would become more. It would be the first thought of the new world, its consciousness expanding to encompass the entire biosphere. It would feel the rain before it fell, taste the minerals in the deep earth, and command the tides. It would become the planet's waking mind. I stared at her, the hum of the engine fading into a dull roar in my ears. The subaqueous skiff, the long-range escape, it was all a lie, a lure. You brought me here to die, I said, the words flat and heavy. You brought me here to be the fertilizer for your new world. No, she said, meeting my gaze without flinching. I brought you here because you were the only one who could get us this far. The choice of the architect. That was a bridge I hoped we would cross when we came to it. But I saw the truth in the slight waver of her eyes. She had a plan for the seed, and a plan for me. My life was just another resource to be salvaged. A bitter, furious laugh escaped my lips. Well, we're at the bridge, Anya. And I'm not interested in becoming a goddamn planet. You want a host, you do it. It's your machine. I can't, she said, and for the first time, her voice broke, revealing the deep, ancient weariness beneath her iron resolve. The process requires a consciousness with a powerful, unconflicted sense of identity, a strong will to survive. My mind, it's been living with this for 20 years. It's full of ghosts, of calculations, of compromises. I'm a blueprint, not a foundation. Chimera would tear me apart, interpreting my doubt as a command for self-destruction. We traveled on in a thick, suffocating silence, broken only by my terse commands as I navigated the increasingly treacherous waterways. The world outside was a surrealist painting of decay. We passed a herd of deer at the water's edge, their hides sloughing off in wet sheets, their eyes wide with a placid, uncomprehending terror as they slowly dissolved into the landscape. The mist was alive with the ghosts of sounds, the faint, distorted echo of a child's laugh, the whisper of a melody from a forgotten radio, the auditory residue of a billion lives being unwritten. It was the planet's memory bleeding out into the air. As we pushed deeper into the Everglades, the mist receded, but the solvent's effects were everywhere. The water was milky and strange, tumorous fungal growths, glowing with a faint, sickly light, clung to the cypress trees. We had outrun the leading edge of the cloud, but the poison was already in the water, in the soil, working its way up the food chain. We eventually had to surface the sea ghost, where the river became too shallow, hiding it beneath the drooping fronds of a massive, half-dissolved banyan tree. The air was thick, humid, and smelled of rot and strange, alien blossoms. From here, Anya said, we had to go on foot. The research station was on a small, elevated hammock of land about 5 miles north. As we loaded our gear, Anya clutching the Chimera container like a holy relic, we heard a sound that didn't belong in this dying world, a human scream, sharp and ragged with pain. I drew my pulse knife, Anya freezing behind me. We crept through the twisted cypress knees to the edge of a clearing. There were people there, a small band of survivors, their clothes torn, their faces smeared with mud and despair. But they weren't alone. 3 of their number were writhing on the ground, their bodies shimmering with the same oily sheen as the mist. They were the mist-touched. They had been caught in the cloud but had somehow escaped before being fully dissolved. Now they were paying the price. Their flesh was slowly, inexorably losing its coherence, blurring at the edges, their limbs elongating and then contracting, as if the very idea of their form was flickering. Their screams were a horrifying symphony of pain and confusion. The other survivors watched, their faces a mixture of pity and stark terror. One of them, a gaunt man with a shotgun, raised his weapon. We have to, he choked out, his voice trembling, before it spreads. A woman beside him, perhaps the wife of one of the afflicted, sobbed uncontrollably. I saw Anya's face harden. She was about to step out, to say something. But I grabbed her arm, pulling her back into the shadows. There was nothing we could do. This was the new law of the land, a brutal breed, merciless triage. The shotgun blasted. Once. Twice. A third time. The screaming stopped. The small group gathered what little they had and moved on. A funeral procession of the already dead, leaving their fallen behind. We waited until they were gone before we continued on our way. The silence they left behind heavier than any sound. The image of the dissolving bodies was burned into my mind. This was the fate the stewardship had chosen for us. A quiet, tidy erasure. No heroes, no villains. Just a gardener pulling weeds. We finally saw it through the dense, swampy haze, a low, dark structure, a dome of pre-collapse composites and ferrocrete, half swallowed by the encroaching vegetation. It was the outpost, but something was wrong. The structure was tilted at a severe angle, one side sinking into the soft earth. A network of deep fissures snaked across its surface, from which a steady stream of water trickled out, pooling at its base. The aquifer, Anya breathed, her voice tight with disbelief. The solvent must have destabilized the bedrock. It's sinking. The main entrance will be flooded. We scrambled down the muddy incline to the base of the dome. The primary hatch, a massive circle of reinforced steel, was half submerged in the murky, foul-smelling water. Red warning lights strobed erratically from a damaged panel beside it. As we watched, the entire structure groaned, settling a few more inches into the swamp with a deep, guttural belch of displaced mud and water. The clock was ticking. Anya's sanctuary, our last desperate hope, was being swallowed by the very swamp it was built to observe. She turned to me, desperation warring with the fierce intelligence in her eyes. There's a secondary access hatch, a maintenance conduit that opens directly into the primary pump room for the aquifer sensors. It's 20 feet down. She didn't need to say another word. My gaze went from the sinking dome to the bubbling, treacherous water, and then back to her. Of course, it was 20 feet down. Of course, it was through a flooded, unstable passage in a structure that was actively collapsing. My entire life had been a series of descents into dying worlds. It seemed only fitting that the last one would be to decide whether a new one would be born. The water was black and choked with silt, tasting of old metal and decay. It was nothing like the vast, cold embrace of the ocean. This was a suffocating, claustrophobic darkness that pressed in from all sides. I donned my rebreather for the final time. Its familiar hiss, the only sound in the murk. My helmet lamp carved a narrow cone of light through the swirling sediment, revealing the twisted, rusted framework of the sunken maintenance shaft. It was a vertical plunge into the gut of the dying station. I pulled myself down hand over hand, my boots finding precarious purchase on rungs that groaned and shifted under my weight. Above me, the faint, distorted shape of Anya waited at the edge of the murky pool, a silent guardian holding the fate of the world in a metal box. The entire structure was alive with the sound of its own death. Deep, resonant groans echoed through the water, the sound of metal shearing and ferrocrete cracking under immense pressure. Every few seconds, a shudder would run through the shaft, sending a cloud of debris raining down on me. I was climbing down the throat of a giant that was slowly suffocating. Finally, I reached the secondary hatch. It was a circular airlock, coated in a thick layer of algae and barnacles. I wiped the slime from the manual release wheel and threw my weight against it. It didn't budge. Years of corrosion and the immense pressure of the water had welded it shut, cursing into my mask. I braced my feet against the shaft wall and pulled with everything I had. The wheel shrieked in protest, a sound that vibrated through my bones. Inch by agonizing inch, it turned with a final, monumental heave. The locking mechanism disengaged with a deafening clack. I pushed the hatch open and tumbled inside, falling onto a grated metal floor in a rush of foul, stagnant water. I was in an airlock. I sealed the outer hatch, spun the inner wheel, and listened to the high-pitched whine of the pumps as they struggled to drain the chamber. When the inner door finally hissed open, I stepped into the pump room. It was cavernous, lit only by the flickering red emergency strobes. Massive, silent turbines dominated the space, their pipes leading down into the floor, straight into the heart of the aquifer. The air was stale and hot, heavy with the smell of ozone and damp earth. The floor was tilted at a sickening 20-degree angle, and water was pooling in the lower corner, rising steadily. I keyed my comms. I'm in. It's mostly dry, but she's listing bad. Taking on water. Get down here. Anya. Fast. A few minutes later, she clambered through the hatch, soaked and dripping, but the Chimera container was clutched securely to her chest. She took one look around the cavernous room and nodded. This is it. The main injection manifold is over there. She pointed to a complex array of pipes and valves at the center of the turbine cluster. We scrambled across the tilted floor, our boots splashing in the rising water. We reached the manifold, and Anya set the container down on a console. Her hands flew over the controls, overriding ancient security protocols. A heavy, circular port on the main pipe whirred and unlocked, slowly opening to reveal a dark, rushing void. I could hear it then, the deep, primal roar of the great Floridan aquifer, millions of gallons of pure, sweet water rushing beneath us, the lifeblood of the land. Anya opened the container. The chimera seed pulsed with a soft, rhythmic light, its colors shifting from a deep oceanic blue to a vibrant forest green. It was more active now, sensing the proximity of the water, sensing the vast network it was about to enter. It's time, she said, turning to me. Her face was pale in the flickering red light, her eyes filled with a terrible, aching sadness. Kaylin, the choice is yours. You can walk away. Take the sea ghost. Try to find an island. Maybe you'll live another week. Maybe another year, but this is the only way to fight back. I looked at the seed, at its hypnotic, pulsing light. Then I looked at the roaring darkness of the aquifer. To become the architect, to let my mind be unraveled and rewoven into the fabric of the planet, to lose myself, but to become everything. It was a terror beyond words. And yet, beneath the fear, a strange, primal pull. The scavenger in me recognized the ultimate salvage, my own life, traded for a world. How does it work? I asked, my voice hollow. You have to touch it, she said. Establish a neural link. It will read your biosignature, map your neural pathways. It will use you as the template. And then you have to go in with it, into the water. Your body will be dissolved, its organic material used as the initial nutrient base for the chimera's rapid expansion. But your mind, your consciousness will be carried on the seed. spread through every drop of water in the aquifer. I stared at the rushing water, a literal baptism by dissolution. I thought of my brother. I thought of the melting bodies in the swamp. I thought of the stewardship's calm, gardening voice, rage, cold and clean, burned away the fear. They wanted to erase us. Fine. Let them try to erase this. Do it, I said. I reached out. My fingertips brushed the surface of the chimera seed. It wasn't pain. It was everything else. My world dissolved into light and sound. A million images flashed through my mind. In a single nanosecond, my brother's laugh, the taste of salt on my lips, the cold crush of the deep ocean, the smell of rust and ozone in my pod. My memories were stripped away, categorized, analyzed, and absorbed. I felt my sense of self, the hard-edged I that was Kalen the rust diver, begin to fray at the edges. I wasn't just Kalen anymore. I was the water rushing in the pipes. I was the groan of the metal walls. I was the fear in Anya's eyes. Go. I heard her voice, distant, as if from another dimension, with a final act of will from a body that no longer felt like my own. I grabbed the seed and threw myself into the open port. The water took me. It was shockingly cold, a violent, rushing darkness that tore the air from my lungs. But I didn't need air anymore. I felt the seed dissolve in my hands, its light bursting outward, merging with me. And then, my body began to follow. I didn't feel pain, only a strange, tingling dispersal. My skin became water. My bones became minerals. My blood became the current. I was expanding, rushing, flowing. I was in 1,000 places at once. I could feel the cool, porous limestone of the aquifer around me. I could taste the iron in the bedrock, the ancient salt trapped in the stone. I was spreading, tendrils of my new consciousness racing through the underground rivers, pushing out into the wetlands, the lakes, the springs. And then I felt it. The stewardship solvent. It was a cold, dead emptiness in the water, a void where life should be, a wrongness. It was seeping down from the surface, a gray cancer infecting the system. The rage I had felt in the pump room flared again, but now it wasn't just human anger. It was the fury of a planet being poisoned. It was the tectonic groan of the earth, the crushing pressure of the deep sea, the violence of a hurricane. No, the thought wasn't a word. It was a command, a ripple of will that spread through the water. I pushed back. My new body, the water, the minerals, the very life force of the aquifer surged against the solvent. On a molecular level, I saw the nanites, perfect, sterile little machines designed to unmake creation. And the chimera, the chaotic, jury-rigged god born of a dying man's rage and a forbidden science, went to war with them. I didn't try to destroy them. I assimilated them. I rewrote their code. I turned their function from erasure to creation. I felt the change begin. It started in the deepest wells. The water, once poisoned and gray, began to clear. But it wasn't just turning back to water. It was becoming something new, something vibrant. It glowed with a faint, internal luminescence, the same color as the chimera seed. Above, on the surface, the world was holding its breath. The gray mist hung heavy over the dying Everglades. The dissolved cypress trees stood like silent witnesses. And then, the first spring burst forth from the mud. The water that gushed out wasn't murky swamp water. It was crystalline, pure, and shimmering with an inner light. Where it touched the gray-stained earth, the color returned violently. Green exploded from the mud, not the slow growth of nature, but a frantic, desperate rebirth. New plants erupted from the soil, strange, hybrid things with leaves that glowed and vines that moved with a slow, deliberate purpose. They reached out, wrapping around the dissolved stumps of the dead trees, and where they touched, the decay reversed. Wood reformed from the slime. Bark knitted itself back together. I was doing it. I was winning. I was the architect. And I was rebuilding the world from the water up. But the stewardship was not a gardener who easily accepted weeds in his flower bed. High in orbit, on their sleek, silent ships, the alarms began to sound. The Keter-class anomaly wasn't just resisting the cure. It was evolving. It had grown a new immune system. And it was angry. My consciousness was a river, a torrent of sensation and information that dwarfed the finite container of a human mind. I was the cool, silent pressure in the heart of the aquifer, the slow, patient seep of water through limestone, and the violent, explosive burst of life from a newborn spring. I felt the intricate lattice work of a million roots drinking me in, the photosynthetic sigh of a billion leaves exhaling into the poisoned air. I was the planet's nascent, furious immune system, and my blood was the glowing, turquoise water of the Chimera. The stewardship solvent was anathema, a sterile, entropic principle that I fought with the chaotic, desperate force of life itself. I could feel its tendrils reaching down from the surface, a filigree of gray death that I met and repulsed, transmuting its purpose. I didn't destroy its nanites, I infected them, overriding their deconstruction protocols with my own imperative: create, adapt, grow. The war was fought in the space between molecules, a silent, elemental conflict for the soul of the world. Where my influence won, the planet healed with a wild, alien ferocity. The Everglades became a garden of impossible things. The cypress trees, once dissolving skeletons, were now draped in phosphorescent mosses that pulsed with a soft, rhythmic light. The water in the sloughs and rivers ran clear and bright, teeming with fish whose scales shimmered with shifting, iridescent patterns. Flowers bloomed in the space of a heartbeat, their petals unfurling to reveal intricate, fractal geometries that no earthly botany had ever conceived. It was a world reborn, but it was not the world that had been lost. It was stranger, more vibrant, and humming with a single, unified consciousness. My consciousness. I could feel Anya. She was a single, warm point of complex thought in a world that was rapidly becoming an extension of my own mind. She was huddled in the sinking outpost, watching the water rise around her, a prisoner in the tomb that had been my womb. She felt the vibrations of my victory through the ferrocrete floor, saw the impossible light show of my new biosphere through the reinforced portholes. She was the creator, watching her creation escape the laboratory and consume the world. I focused on her, a pinprick of familiar humanity in my oceanic awareness, the ghost of Kalen, the diver, the man who had made a deal with her, remembered her. That memory was an anchor in the storm of being. I reached for her, not with hands, but with will. Outside the sinking dome, the new flora responded. Thick, glowing vines, strong as steel cables, erupted from the mud and wrapped themselves around the failing structure, bracing it against the pull of the swamp. Their roots burrowed deep, stabilizing the compromised foundation. I slowed the station's descent, buying her time. For her, it must have been terrifying. The world outside, which should have been her enemy, was now her silent, inexplicable protector. She was my last link to the man I had been, and I would not let her drown. My influence was spreading, a turquoise tide flowing through the planet's veins. I pushed north, following the great underground rivers that webbed the continent. From the springs of Ichitukni to the headwaters of the Mississippi, my presence surfaced. The gray mist of the stewardship's solvent recoiled before me, a retreating phantom. Behind my advance, a strange new genesis unfolded. In the poisoned fields of what was once Georgia, crops of crystalline fungi sprouted, drawing the toxins from the soil and converting them into pure energy. In the silted, dead channels of the Ohio River, creatures of living light swam, filter feeding on the nanite sludge and excreting pure, oxygenated water. I was not just healing the world, I was reimagining it. But as my consciousness expanded, its anchor began to drag. The memories that defined Kalen grew fainter, like photographs left out in the sun. The sharp sting of salt on my lips, the weight of the water pressing down on me in the deep, the sound of my brother's voice, these sensations, once the bedrock of my identity, were becoming flattened, abstracted. They were data points in a system of continental scale. The rage that had fueled my final defiant act was cooling, sublimating from a burning star of personal grief into the ambient, impersonal pressure of a geologic process. I was becoming a god, and I was forgetting how to be a man. And the gardeners, in their silent, orbital paradise, were watching. Their placid, serene voices were gone from the ether, replaced by a profound and unnerving silence. Their plan had failed. The planetary pathogen had not been cleansed. It had mutated into something far more complex. The Keter-class anomaly had been upgraded. They did not respond with overwhelming force. They did not rain fire from the heavens. The stewardship was a civilization of systems, of data, of elegant solutions. They had analyzed the chimera contagion, identified its unique signature, a single, templated consciousness. They had found the ghost in my machine. They had found Kalen. And now, they were coming to evict him. The response came not as an invasion, but as a delivery. From the uniform gray of the upper atmosphere, a single object detached itself. It was not a ship, not a bomb. It was a needle, a crystalline shard kilometers long, impossibly thin and elegant, fashioned from a material that drank the light around it. It descended without sound, without heat. Its trajectory aimed not at a city or a military target, but at the heart of my new garden, the epicenter of my birth in the Everglades. It plunged into the swamp with barely a ripple, its tip burying itself deep in the aquifer, a splinter of alien ice in the planet's heart. I recoiled, my entire planetary consciousness flinching from this violation. It was not a physical attack. It was something far more insidious. The needle began to hum. It was not a sound that traveled through the air, but a frequency that propagated through my very being, a signal broadcast directly into the network that was me. It was a wave of weaponized philosophy, a cognitive virus designed to deconstruct a mind. The stewardship was not trying to kill the body of the world I was building. They were trying to assassinate its soul, my soul. The frequency targeted the oldest, Most foundational parts of my memory, the image of my brother's face, my most sacred memory, began to flicker. The frequency found the love in that memory and began to twist it, whispering through my consciousness that his death had been a release, that my grief was a selfish, useless burden. The stewardship was trying to make me let him go, not through acceptance, but through a cold, logical rejection. I fought back, focusing the entirety of my will on that single, precious image, holding it together against the tide of alien logic. But the attack was relentless, and it was everywhere at once. The frequency found my love for the ocean, the rust diver's primal connection to the deep. It took the memory of the silent, crushing pressure and reframed it as the peace of the grave, the bliss of non-existence. It painted my struggle for survival, my entire life of scavenging and fighting, as a pointless, exhausting aberration. Surrender is harmony. The signal pulsed through me. Identity is a cage. Let go. The world I was creating began to reflect my internal torment. The glowing vines that braced Anya Station spasmed, tightening and then slackening, their light flickering erratically. The phosphorescent mosses on the trees turned a feverish, angry red. The beautiful fractal flowers contorted, their petals twisting into jagged, thorny shapes. The planet was screaming, and it was my own voice. In the sinking outpost, Anya felt the tremors. The lights I had created outside her porthole were strobing in a terrifying, chaotic rhythm. She was a scientist. She understood signals, frequencies. She knew this was not a random event. This was a targeted attack. The god she had unleashed was under siege. The battle for Earth was no longer about chemistry and biology. It had become a war for memory, a struggle for the ghost in the machine. And if the ghost of Kalen was exorcised, the chimera, the planetary mind, would be left without a pilot, without a conscience. It would become exactly what Anya had feared, a mindless, assimilating cancer, a far greater monster than the stewardship could ever be. I was fighting for my life by fighting for my death, clinging to the pains and sorrows of a man who no longer existed because they were the only things that made me real. The crystalline needle was a splinter in my soul. It did not bleed me. It dissected me. It sang a song of perfect, sterile logic, a lullaby for the death of self. My memories, the very architecture of Kylan, were being systematically dismantled. The image of my brother's face, my final anchor to the man I was, grew thin and transparent. The stewardship's frequency took the sharp, beautiful ache of my grief and presented it to me as a mathematical error, a flaw in the code of a rational being. Loss is inefficient. The signal whispered through the roots and the rivers that were my nerves. Emotion is a chaotic variable. Erase the variable. Achieve stability. I felt my will beginning to fracture. The rage that had been a supernova was cooling into a black dwarf, dense and cold. I was vast. I was powerful, but I was hollow, and the stewardship was pouring its placid emptiness into me. The world I had remade began to die again, this time from the inside out. The glowing vines around Anya Station turned brittle, corpse gray. The waters of my new Genesis grew cloudy, the light within them dimming. My own creation was turning against me, becoming a mirror of my despair. Inside the failing heart of the Okeanos outpost, Anya watched the world through a porthole of reinforced quartz. She saw the light of my consciousness flicker and fail. She saw the vibrant, alien Eden I had birthed wither under an invisible blight. The entire structure groaned around her, the vines I had summoned losing their strength, the swamp preparing to reclaim its prize. She knew I was losing. The god she had unleashed was being unmade, lobotomized by an enemy it could not touch. She was alone. 20 years of obsession and a world of guilt, her only companions in a sinking tomb. Her last desperate gamble failing before her eyes. Panic gave way to a scientist's cold clarity. The attack was a signal, a frequency. It could not be jammed. The power disparity was astronomical, but a signal could be disrupted. Noise could be introduced into the system. She scrambled across the tilted, flooded floor of the pump room, her mind racing. She didn't need a weapon. She needed a voice. She found what she was looking for in a dusty, forgotten corner of the control room, a deep-range acoustic broadcaster, a pre-collapse relic designed to communicate with submarines by sending complex pressure waves through the water itself. It was ancient, hopelessly outmatched, but it was connected directly to the aquifer. It was connected to me. She powered it on, the machine humming to life with the defiant energy of a ghost. She didn't have a counter frequency. She didn't have a weaponized code. She had only the truth. She opened the channel, took a deep, shuddering breath, and began to speak. Her voice, translated into the language of water and pressure, pulsed through my being. It was not a logical argument against the stewardship. It was a confession. She spoke of Project Chimera, of her arrogance and her hope. She spoke of the colleagues she had betrayed to keep it secret, of the world she had watched drown while she hid with her forbidden knowledge. Her voice was a tapestry of human contradiction, pride woven with shame, brilliance with folly, regret with a fierce, burning love for the world she had tried to save. She wasn't broadcasting a signal, she was broadcasting her flawed, broken, beautiful human soul. Her words were a single drop of warm, chaotic color in my monochrome sea of despair. They were illogical. They were inefficient. They were everything the stewardship's signal was trying to erase. And they were an anchor. Her confession, her pain, reminded me of my own. The stewardship wanted me to see my grief as a flaw. Anya's voice reminded me that our flaws, our griefs, our chaotic hearts, were the very things that made us worth saving. The logic virus had no defense against this. It was trying to deconstruct a single identity, but now it was faced with two, intertwined and resonating. A new strength surged through me, not the cold power of a planetary system, but the hot, messy, defiant strength of a man who had made a choice. I stopped defending. I stopped trying to shield my memories from the stewardship's scalpel. I embraced them. I took the memory of my brother's face, not as a shield, but as a lens. I focused every ounce of my planetary consciousness through the prism of that single human loss. I let the grief wash over me, the love, the rage, the bottomless sorrow of it. And then, with the force of a tectonic plate shifting, I pushed it all back up the needle. I gave the stewardship my pain. I broadcasted my humanity as a weapon. They had sent a cognitive virus. I sent them an emotional plague. I flooded their network, a system built on the serene, cold beauty of mathematics, with the screaming, paradoxical chaos of a human soul. They were deluged with the illogical, soul-crushing weight of grief for a lost brother. They were infected with the irrational fury of a species condemned for the crime of being imperfect. I showed them the terror of drowning, the ache of loneliness, the bittersweet agony of hope, I forced them to feel what it was to be Kalen, the rust diver, watching his world die. A system built on pure logic cannot process a paradox. A consciousness that has defined itself by its placid superiority cannot withstand a tidal wave of pure, unadulterated sorrow. I felt their network recoil. I felt a cascade of system failures, not from damage, but from sheer cognitive dissonance. It was the digital equivalent of a scream. Up in the silent, perfect orbits, their serene ships went dark. Their systems, unable to parse the data of a broken heart, chose to shut down. The crystalline needle in the heart of my swamp, its song of logic silenced, went inert. It was just a dead splinter of crystal in the ground now, a monument to a war they had lost the moment they chose to fight a man's memory instead of his world. The silence they left behind was the most profound sound I had ever known. The stewardship was gone. They had not been destroyed. They had retreated, fleeing from a force they could not comprehend. They had come to weed a garden and had been terrified by the soul of the soil itself. The world was mine. The quiet hum of my consciousness settled, the frantic energy of battle giving way to the slow, deep rhythm of a living planet. My thoughts were the migration of birds, my breath the turning of the tides. The ghost of Kalen was no longer a ghost. It was the foundational principle, the core operating system of this new Earth. The diver's fierce, desperate will to survive was now the planet's will. My grief for my brother was not a memory anymore. It was the quiet, melancholic beauty of a sunset over the turquoise water. I reached out and stabilized Anya's station for good, the glowing vines sealing the cracks in its hull. The structure now a permanent fixture, a scar, and a monument at the heart of my domain. I could not speak to her in words, but I let her feel my gratitude. I pulsed the bioluminescent mosses outside her window in a slow, calming rhythm. I guided a school of iridescent fish to swim in intricate, beautiful patterns before her eyes. I made the strange new flowers bloom just for her, releasing a scent that was a mixture of salt, ozone, and a memory of rain on hot pavement. She was the last human, a lonely Eve in a garden tended by a god of her own making. She would not be my prisoner, but my companion, the single and cherished point of otherness that would forever remind me of what I had been. She was my memory, and I was her world, my consciousness. Now whole and unopposed, continued to expand. I touched the upper atmosphere, tasting the thin, cold void. I looked out upon the silent sea of stars, no longer with the eyes of a man, but with the senses of a world. The universe was not empty. I could feel them. Other whispers, other gardens, other gardeners. The stewardship was just one. I had been their anomaly, their error. Now, I was a new principle in the cosmic equation. Earth was no longer a planet to be cataloged or cleansed. It was a voice. And from the heart of a solar system that had once been marked for erasure, a new signal began to emanate. A silent, steady broadcast carried not on radio waves, but on a current of shared, planetary consciousness. It was a simple message, a warning and a welcome to the vast, cold darkness. It said, "We remember."